Private Greenbelt, Patricia said, chin high, arms folded like she owned the trees. Your wife's trespassing. Security flagged her, so the officer's detaining her until we sort this out. The patrol car door thumped shut on Elena. The lock chirped. Blue strobes washed the birch trunks and the memorial bench my father built. I tasted metal, the kind you taste before a storm. It's not private, I said, steady. That strip was a recorded common easement tied to my deed. You didn't have authority to close it. Her smile twitched. Just a millimeter, but enough. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown was about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I'm Daniel Mercer, I added, calm, cybersecurity consultant. Before that, I trained field officers to gather clean evidence and make bad decisions backfire. This bench wasn't decoration, it was a promise. And promises made on service wood didn't break. Patricia waved at the officer like she directed traffic. Gravel cracked under her heels. HOA rules are clear. They weren't, I said. Your authority stopped at that easement stake. The county plat said so, and the cam on my chest was time-stamping every second. The air smelled like cut grass and hot brakes. My pulse climbed, then steadied as I focused. Elena sat behind glass, face composed, hairline damp from the heat. No fear. The last time my father sat on that bench, he'd coughed into a folded handkerchief and told me the hill would always be ours. We buried the cloth under the first board. I could still feel the grain under my palm, the shallow dent where his ring had nicked the wood during installation. The HOA didn't see a bench. They saw an obstacle, a name they hadn't written. This wasn't about a path, I said, quieter. It was about erasing what you couldn't control. Wind pushed through the leaves. The officer shifted his weight, eyes flicking to the easement marker and back to me. You'll get a violation notice, Patricia said. Multiple. You'd been sending those to half the street, I said. Faded shutters, garden stakes, a flag 1 inch off spec. Your pattern wasn't enforcement, it was intimidation. And patterns told stories. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. I keyed my phone without looking away. The folder labeled FOXHOLLOWEVIDENCE opened with a haptic click. I wasn't waving paper. I was pulling threads. The Greenbelt Covenant pulled back to the deed. The deed pulled back to county code. County code pulled toward offices bigger than Patricia's clipboard. A moment, I said to the officer. You were going to need the incident number for the record, and the easement reference so this didn't bounce back on you later. He nodded once. The car's fan hummed, pushing warm air through the slats. People watched from porches. You could feel an audience even when you didn't see it, eyes like pricks of heat on the back of your neck. Fox Hollow wasn't cruel by nature. Fear made it quiet. Fear of fines, of liens, of letters with boldface words. That quiet had weight. It pressed on the green, on the fence posts. On the bench my father sanded smooth while telling me about a winter field half a world away. He'd said a man became a place when he promised to protect it. My promise started there. Elena wasn't a trespasser, I said. She trained people to notice lines others pretended weren't there. Patricia's mouth tightened. Irrelevant. It was context, I said. And context was why this wouldn't end with a form letter. I kneaded the edge of the bench with my thumb. The wood was warm, sun-fatigued, alive in a way only old wood is. My chest cam blinked. My phone logged GPS, ambient decibels, unit numbers, badge numbers. Not noise, proof. I didn't need to shout. I needed the pressure to move from us to them, inch by inch, until the weight of process landed where it belonged. Outside, authority didn't arrive because you demanded it. It arrived because you set the table so cleanly it had to sit down. Where are you watching from? I asked, eyes on the easement stake, voice level. The officer glanced at Patricia. The breeze rose, lifting the caution tape she'd had, wrapped around a sapling like a warning flag. I pictured county planners standing here, boots on gravel, reading the same marker, asking the same question I'd been asking since the first notice. Who gave you the right to lock legacy behind a rule book you wrote last Thursday? I didn't need their answer yet. I needed their footsteps on this path, the scrape of their clipboards, the official quiet that made overreach unravel. Patricia had chosen the wrong hill to claim and the wrong family to test. This was only the beginning. Patricia turned on her heel, muttering about violation forms, but I stayed rooted at the easement marker. Elena was released after 10 long minutes, the officer shaking his head as if he knew the complaint wouldn't stick. We walked back together, past staring porches, and I felt the quiet burn heavier than the heat. Fear ruled this place more than rules ever did. I'd seen that kind of silence before, where people looked down not because they agreed, but because they didn't dare. The next morning, I stopped at the neighborhood bulletin kiosk by the pool house. The corkboard sagged under overlapping flyers, but the violations section was what mattered. Half the sheet protectors glared in neon ink. Non-compliant shutters, prohibited lawn ornament, mailbox repaint order, names blurred into a pattern, Patricia's pattern. She wasn't enforcing, she was targeting. Each letterhead bore the same clipped phrases, the same threat of escalating fines, the same reminder that liens could be filed without warning. I traced my finger along one notice, signed by a neighbor 2 doors down, a flagpole 3 inches taller than approved spec. The fine doubled in 30 days. Another sheet. Someone cited for children's chalk drawings on the driveway. The penalty written in black marker across the top. Repeat offense. It wasn't control of property, it was control of people. Fear made them compliant. Elena wasn't the first they tried to humiliate, I said, voice low, and she won't be the last. A mother tugged her child away from the kiosk, as if being seen near me would add her name to the list. I stepped back, feeling eyes pull away from windows. Fox Hollow Estates wore its silence like armor, but that silence cracked if you pressed hard enough. The air smelled like chlorine from the pool behind the fence, mixed with fresh mulch. Somewhere a lawnmower buzzed, its steady hum covering the shuffle of footsteps. I looked down and saw the same fonts repeated over and over, the HOA's printed signature like a brand. I knew the tactic: make the punishment visible, make compliance contagious. In intelligence work, we'd call it psychological leverage. Break one person publicly to control 10 quietly. Patricia had studied that book, even if she'd never admitted it. I pulled out my phone and took slow, deliberate photos of the board. Every notice, every name, every date. I wasn't archiving for curiosity. I was mapping a system. Patterns told stories, and this one screamed abuse of process. As I stepped away, the faint tap of heels made me glance back. Patricia again, clipboard pressed to her chest. "Collecting souvenirs?" she asked. "Collecting context," I said. My chest cam blinked once in its silent cycle. "You wrote a story on that board." "I'm just making sure someone else reads it." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. "This community thrives on order. People respect rules here. Fear isn't respect," I said. "Fear just hides the cracks." She tilted her head. "You'll learn compliance eventually." "They all do." She tapped her clipboard against the board and walked away. The paper edges fluttered in her wake like warning flags. I stayed until the sun burned high, studying the postings until the details pressed into my memory like coordinates. Each citation wasn't just a notice. It was a breadcrumb trail of power misused. I'd trained people to follow trails like these, to build chains of evidence from fragments no one else noticed. This wasn't about one trespassing claim. It was a pattern of intimidation, stitched together in plain sight, daring anyone to pull the thread. When Elena joined me, she glanced at the board and shook her head. "How do they keep getting away with this?" "Because no one pushes back," I said. "But that board gave me a map. And maps lead somewhere." I folded the image of my father's bench into, and that thought. The memory wasn't fading, it was sharpening, like steel ground against stone. They wanted silence, but silence was just another kind of evidence. Every porch light that dimmed, every curtain that shifted, every neighbor who stepped inside when Patricia passed, it all told the story she thought she owned. "Where there's pattern," I whispered, "there's weakness." The kiosk creaked in the breeze, a flimsy structure loaded with fear. I tightened my grip on the phone. The evidence folder grew, not with noise, but with proof. Outside authority didn't respond to whispers. It responded to systems. and Patricia had just handed me hers, posted for everyone to see. This fight had never been about one violation. It was about a culture of fear, and I'd dismantled cultures before. The kiosk swayed once in the breeze before settling back into silence. I left it behind, phone heavy in my pocket, and cut across the curved walkway toward the HOA office. It sat wedged between the clubhouse gym and a row of manicured hedges, glass doors gleaming like nothing bad could happen inside. But I knew better. Glass only reflected what it wanted you to see. Inside was where the real pressure lived. The air conditioner hit hard as I stepped in. The place smelled like toner and lemon cleaner. On the wall, frames lined with community excellence plaques stared back. Behind the counter, Patricia's voice carried from an open doorway, clipped, commanding, already dismissive of whoever she was speaking to. And then he appeared. Mark Holloway, HOA secretary. His tie was knotted too tightly, like it was choking him. He held a stack of files, but shuffled them from one arm to the other, as if they weighed more than paper should. His eyes darted toward me, then away, then back again. The movement wasn't confidence. It was hesitation carved into body language. "Daniel," he said finally, adjusting his glasses with one hand, while keeping the folders pressed against his chest like armor. "This isn't a good time." "Didn't seem like a good time for Elena either when you let Patricia lock her in a squad car," I said. My voice was steady, but my chest burned. Mark's jaw worked, silent. He shifted again, one foot back like he might retreat. The folders trembled slightly in his grip, not from weakness, but from the weight of choice. I recognized that look. I'd trained officers who flinched the same way when told to enforce orders they didn't believe in. Patricia's voice cut through the office again. "We'll increase the fines if they don't comply. People fall in line when money's at stake." Mark closed his eyes just long enough for me to see the strain behind them. He adjusted the files, then deliberately set them on the counter, palms flat on the manila covers. His shoulders slumped forward. "You know it's wrong," I said quietly. "The easement, the bench, all of it. And you've watched her weaponize those. Notices like a hammer." He didn't answer, but his silence wasn't denial, it was conflict. His fingers tapped against the cardboard edges, 3 quick beats before stilling again. When he looked up, the hallway light caught the sweat along his temple. "I can't," he began, then stopped. His throat worked. His gaze flicked toward Patricia's office door, then back to me. Every movement said more than words. The hesitation, the slight forward lean, the way his mouth pressed into a line when Patricia laughed in the background. "You're the secretary," I reminded him. "Your signature is on minutes that never happened. She needs you complicit, but complicit isn't the same as loyal." He swallowed. His eyes softened, then hardened again. It was like watching someone fight a battle without moving a step. His shoulders squared, then sagged, squared again. Internal war visible in posture, in the tremor of his jaw, in the weight of not choosing. The phone in my pocket vibrated once, a silent reminder of the photos, the evidence folder growing heavier. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "You don't have to choose sides today. But when you're ready, remember, silence is also proof." Patricia stepped into view before he could answer, clipboard tucked under her arm. Her eyes swept the room like floodlights. Mark stiffened instantly, arms pulled back tight, shoulders rigid. She smiled thin. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "here to contest again? Or just browsing?" I held her gaze, not hers. "Just making sure the story you're writing stays legible." Mark shifted behind her, fingers curling against the counter's edge so tight his knuckles whitened. He looked like he might speak, but the words died before reaching daylight. Still, the tremor in his hands told me everything. Conflict wasn't silence. It was the prelude to action. I left the office, the smell of toner fading behind me, and knew I'd seen enough. Patricia's authority wasn't unshakable. Cracks were visible in her own ranks, even if they trembled instead of spoke, and cracks had a way of spreading once pressure was applied. "Where are you watching from?" The lemon cleaner tang of the office clung to me as I stepped back into the daylight. But Patricia's thin smile followed even sharper. She had cracked the whip in there, and I'd seen Mark flinch. Cracks were forming, but pressure had to be steady, not reckless. Still, I didn't need to wait long for her retaliation. By the time I reached my porch, the first letter was already waiting. The envelope was white, stamped bold. Fox Hollow Estates Violation Notice. My name in block letters across the front, as if shouting ownership of guilt. I tore it open on the porch rail, the paper stiff and over-inked. The notice claimed, unauthorized alteration of community property, the bench. Fines listed, $500 escalating weekly. Threat of lien emphasized with double underlines. I laughed once, short and without. Humor. Elena joined me, towel still over her shoulders from a run. She wasted no time, she said. Her voice was calm, but her hand gripped the railing tight. She escalated, I said. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine sap from the trail. I glanced back at the bench through the trees, the caution tape fluttering like a taunt. She put the bench in her crosshairs. That's personal. The paper crinkled in my hand. Each line was a weapon disguised as administration. Patricia wanted the weight of the HOA letterhead to silence me, but she didn't understand. Silence was never my language. My work had always been about signals hidden in noise, finding the one frequency that revealed the truth. And this was a loud frequency? I spread the paper on the porch rail, marking the phrasing in my mind. Alteration of community property. That meant she'd classified the bench as hers, as if my father's sweat and wood counted for nothing. She'd shifted the easement from deed-tied to HOA owned. It was more than arrogance. It was a false claim of jurisdiction. Elena leaned beside me, her breathing steadied, but her eyes held fire. She's trying to erase Dad's promise. She's trying, I said, but trying isn't succeeding. I folded the notice neatly and slid it into my evidence folder. The pressure wasn't unbearable yet, but escalation always came before collapse. Patricia had tightened the screws too fast, and fast meant sloppy. Neighbors passed on the sidewalk, eyes sliding to the envelope in my hand, then away. The silence deepened. They had all gotten these papers, and they all feared being next. I watched a man tug his dog closer, his gait quickening as if proximity alone meant citation. That fear was the air Patricia breathed, but fear also meant witnesses. Witnesses who wanted a reason to hope. I called out to him casually, "Violation letter today?" He froze, half-turned, then nodded quickly before hurrying off. Even that tiny acknowledgement was data. Her campaign was wide, not isolated. Widespread abuse was harder to defend when the right authority read it. The cicadas started their chorus, the sound high and steady, filling the spaces between words. I tapped the envelope against the porch rail. She wants to draw us into compliance by force. But escalation cuts both ways. The porch boards creaked under my boots as I stepped down. The easement marker was visible from here, a thin rod of metal at the property line. I snapped a photo with the letter in frame, GPS coordinates tagging the evidence. Every escalation she tried, I would capture. Every false claim, every threat of lien, every misuse of authority. It would all stack until the weight shifted back where it belonged. "Elena," I said, "this isn't about fines. It's about setting the precedent that she owns legacy." She nodded. "So we prove she doesn't." Exactly. Outside authority didn't move because someone shouted. It moved when the evidence was undeniable, layered, clean. Patricia had just given me my next layer. The violation wasn't a defeat. It was her overreach in writing. The sun dropped lower, shadows stretching across the cul-de-sac. Somewhere, a basketball thumped. Somewhere else, shutters closed against the heat. But on my porch rail sat the most important signal yet. Her official escalation, signed and sealed. "Keep stacking, Patricia," I whispered, folding the letter once more. "Every page is another stone in the case you're building against yourself. Where are you watching from?" The letter still felt hot in my pocket as I drove into town the next morning. Patricia's escalation was bold, but bold left tracks. The county records building stood 3 floors tall, brick and glass. The kind of place designed to look neutral, bureaucratic, unshakable. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and ink, and the hum of fluorescent lights pressed down from above. I signed in at the desk, gave my name, and waited for a clerk to guide me back. When she handed me a request form, I wrote slowly, deliberately. property plats, easement records, covenant filings for Fox Hollow Estates. Her eyes flicked at the stack I asked for, then she shrugged and slid it into the system. 10 minutes later, a manila folder dropped onto the counter in front of me with a weight heavier than paper. I sat at a long oak table, the surface scarred from years of elbows and pens. I opened the folder, the smell of toner curling upward, and let my fingers trace the plats. Lines etched in ink decades ago stretched across the pages, streets, lots, trails. And there it was, the greenbelt, a shaded corridor marked common easement. I leaned closer, scanning the notations. No amendment, no secondary deed transfer, no signature granting HOA, authority to restrict access. Patricia's letter had claimed the bench was an alteration of community property, but the county's own plat said the trail wasn't hers to control. Her power ended at the easement marker, the same one I'd pointed to with the officer watching. The hum of the lights grew louder in the silence. This was the kind of evidence outside authority respected. Recorded, official, undeniable. A covenant tied to the land itself, not to a president's whims. I copied the reference numbers into my phone, careful to double-check each digit. My thumb left faint smudges on the page edges, but the words stayed clear. Easement, common use, protected by deed. Patricia had claimed ownership over something the county had locked as shared. That wasn't enforcement, it was overreach. The room felt colder now, as if the air itself recognized the shift. I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't pushing back on intimidation. I had found the line of authority she had crossed. I gathered the folder and returned it to the desk, thanking the clerk. She barely looked up, the transaction routine for her. But for me, the weight of it settled deep. My father's bench wasn't just memory. It was protected by law. Outside, the sun hit hard against the glass as I stepped into the parking lot. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, but the clarity in my chest cut through it. I had the coordinates, the records, the proof that would matter to inspectors and attorneys. Patricia wanted to play with paper. I had just found the paper that outranked hers. Driving back, the streets blurred past, but my mind replayed the moment at the table, the bold print of common easement, the absence of any amendment. Silence on a record meant more than a dozen threats printed on HOA letterhead. Silence meant the county had never given her the right she pretended to own. When I pulled into Fox Hollow, I slowed at the gate. The security guard gave me the usual wave, eyes tired, uniform wilting in the heat. He didn't know what rested in the phone on my seat. Evidence. Context. A map of power lines drawn decades before Patricia ever dreamed of holding a clipboard. Elena waited on the porch, arms folded, a question in her eyes. I held up the phone. "The plat says easement," I said. Her shoulders dropped, tension unwinding, but her expression stayed sharp. "So it's proof," she said. "It's more than proof. It's leverage." She nodded once. The breeze lifted a strand of her hair, sunlight catching it gold. Behind her, the trees swayed, the bench barely visible through the green. The caution tape still hung there like a warning, but warnings didn't frighten me anymore. They only told me where to push next. I stepped onto the porch, tucking the phone away. The escalation was clear, the stakes sharper. Patricia had declared war with paper. I had answered with records she couldn't rewrite. And the balance had just shifted. The sun cut sharp across the greenbelt when I walked back that evening. The air smelled of sap and dust, cicadas buzzing overhead. The bench was there, half hidden under caution tape Patricia had ordered, strung across it like a crime scene. Yellow plastic fluttered against the wood my father had smoothed with his own hands. I stepped closer. The tape rasped in the wind, pulling tight against the metal stakes hammered into the ground on either side. A new laminated sign hung crooked from one stake. Unauthorized structure, removal pending. My jaw tightened. She wasn't content with violation letters anymore. She was aiming straight at the heart of what mattered most. I crouched, tracing the grain along the backrest. The shallow dent where my father's ring had struck during installation was still there, weathered but permanent. The memory surged, him coughing into his handkerchief, telling me that some places outlive people, that a promise made to protect them was what tied a man to the ground he stood on. That bench wasn't unauthorized. It was legacy carved into cedar. Footsteps scuffed gravel behind me. A neighbor slowed, glancing at the taped bench, then at me. His eyes held recognition but slid away quickly as if staring too long risked citation. The silence cut deeper than his absence of words. Patricia had made fear into a language, and everyone spoke it fluently. I pulled out my phone, snapping photos of the sign, the tape, the bench's coordinates pinned against the easement marker a few feet away. The evidence folder expanded again. But this wasn't just about building a case anymore. This was personal. Patricia had crossed from harassment into desecration. The breeze shifted, carrying the faint scent of chlorine from the pool. Behind me, the officer from earlier days off duty walked his dog along the trail. He paused, recognizing me. His eyes went to the tape, then to my phone, then back to me. He didn't speak, but the tightening around his jaw told me what he thought. Even law enforcement had limits on how much pettiness they'd tolerate. I tugged at the tape. It tore with a hiss, curling back on itself. I left the remains hanging off one stake, like evidence of intrusion rather than defiance. The bench stood bare again, sunlight warming its wood. I sat down slowly, pressing my palms flat against the seat, feeling the heat soak into my skin. Across the trail, Patricia's SUV rolled past, windows tinted, her outline faint behind the glass. She slowed, watching me sit where she had tried to ban me. Her brake lights glowed before she pressed forward, disappearing around the curve. No horn, no words. Just silent observation. The kind meant to intimidate. But intimidation didn't work anymore. Not here, not with my father's promise under me and county records in my pocket. Elena appeared from the trail, jogging back from her evening run. She slowed when she saw me on the bench, sweat beaded at her hairline, but her eyes fixed on the sign's jagged remains fluttering in the dirt. She shook her head. "They're not backing down," she said. "No," I agreed. "They're doubling down." Her gaze softened on the bench. "Dad would have laughed at their tape." I nodded. "And then he'd have reminded me not to laugh too long. Promises need defending." The shadows lengthened around us, cicadas steady overhead. I could feel the weight of every neighbor watching through their curtains, measuring whether Patricia's grip was unbreakable or if someone could push back. Sitting here wasn't just defiance. It was proof the tape didn't own me. The laminated sign still swung on the stake, creaking in the wind. I snapped another photo, then tucked my phone away. The evidence trail was clean. Violation letters, intimidation patterns, and now direct interference with deed-protected land. It wasn't noise anymore. It was a case in motion. Elena sat beside me, shoulders brushing mine. "So what's next?" I looked out over the trail, the path curling back toward the rows of identical houses. "Next is pressure. Real pressure. She thinks she controls this ground, but the county says otherwise. Now it's time to make them see it too." The air shifted cooler as the sun dipped behind the tree line. I stayed seated, hands firm on the wood, the weight of memory anchoring me. Patricia had chosen to escalate by threatening legacy. I had chosen to respond by planting myself on it. One way or another, the tape would never hold. I left the bench when the last light bled off the trees. Cicadas kept time as I crossed the cul-de-sac, drawn by a porch light across from the trail. Mark waited at the edge of his driveway apron, half in shadow, half in that flat yellow cone, his shoulders hunched as if he could fold himself away. "Walk with me a second," he said, voice low. We didn't move far, just 3 steps onto concrete still radiating heat. The asphalt smelled of tar. His tie was gone, top button open, fingers worrying the hem of his shirt like a loose tooth. "I saw the tape," he said, "and I saw you sit." "I wasn't moving," I said. He nodded, jaw flexing. His eyes kept darting toward his front window, as if the glass itself could listen. "Patricia's pushing this too far." The words came weak at first, then stronger. "I've been signing things I shouldn't have signed." "How far back?" Rubber squeaked as his shoe scraped the apron. "The meeting where she claims the board approved closing the trail?" There wasn't a quorum. 2 members dialed in, audio cut twice, no vote. She told me to file the minutes as unanimous approval. He pulled his phone, the glow lit sweat at his temples. I kept the draft, the one I wrote before she rewrote it, Original timestamps? Metadata's intact, he said. His thumb hovered, then tapped. And there's more. Security contract addendum. She authorized private patrol to assist law enforcement without counsel review. Bylaws require legal review for any change over $5,000. She told me to backdate the signature block. You did? His head dropped. I didn't backdate, but I didn't stop her. She printed, signed, scanned. I archived the scan. The system logs the real upload time. It doesn't match the date on the page. The porch light hummed. A sprinkler ticked somewhere behind us. Mark's hands wouldn't stay still, curling, uncurling, finally gripping his phone like a railing in rough water. I need to know why you're telling me, I said. Because it's wrong, he said, voice scraped raw. Because I watched your wife shoved into a patrol car over a lie. Because that bench... His voice cracked. He rubbed his eyes. My dad wasn't military, but he carved our dining table. You don't let people rewrite the grain. He angled the screen toward me. Draft minutes with blank tally lines. A second file labeled Final. Posted. Showing unanimous approval, time-stamped hours before the meeting ended. A PDF of the addendum followed. Signature block carrying last month's date. His system log. Showed upload 2 days later, near midnight. That's falsification, I said. Process violations, contract irregularities, not just ugly, actionable. He flinched at the word. If I give this up, I'm done on the board. Patricia will... He let the sentence fall. If I don't, I'm part of it. You won't give it to me, I said. You'll give it to the people who can compel change. County planning, state oversight. I'll stand beside you when you do. His mouth opened, closed. He nodded, small at first, then with weight. I'll testify. I'll sign whatever they need. He swiped to a calendar invite. She scheduled a work session tomorrow morning. No minutes, no notice. She plans to push removal of the bench as an emergency task. That breaks open meeting law. The concrete radiated back the day's heat. Everything clicked, county easement, intimidation pattern, and now an insider confessing. Outside authority didn't need outrage. It needed documented failures, timelines that couldn't coexist. I'll draft the submission tonight, I said. County first, then the state liaison. We'll attach your originals and logs. Tomorrow, when she calls that session, inspectors will already be on calendar. You can move that fast? I don't move fast, I said. I move prepared. A car rolled by, slow, tires whispering. Mark stepped in and out of the light, shoulders squaring, then settling. I'm in, he said, steadier. No more hiding. Good, I said. Then we start now. He sent the files. My phone chimed twice. Proof slid into place, weighty and clean. Behind the glass, a curtain closed. He noticed, winced, but didn't waver. We'll do this by the book, I said, pocketing the phone. So when they arrive, the ground is solid under their feet. Mark nodded, eyes clearer. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for not speaking sooner. You're speaking now, I said. That's what counts. The cicadas pressed on. The driveway held its heat. And for the first time since Patricia started this, the balance tipped, quietly, decisively, toward the kind of pressure she couldn't smile through. The files Mark pushed to my phone still glowed on the screen when I stepped into my home office. The walls were lined with maps, old case folders, and the faint hum of the server I kept in the corner. Elena leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, her face half in shadow from the hall light. You got something, she said. More than something, I answered, pulling the chair back. I dropped into it and connected the phone to the system. The screen lit up with timestamps, metadata, and digital logs. Mark gave me originals, draft minutes before Patricia rewrote them, contract logs proving she backdated. Enough to trigger oversight. Elena stepped in, closing the door behind her. That's what you needed, she said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of nights spent watching me grind through smaller cases. I opened folders one by one, layering the evidence. Draft minutes side by side with the final version. Metadata logs showing creation times. The patrol addendum with a backdated signature block. Upload logs contradicting it. Each piece clicked into place like teeth on a gear. The system didn't care about fear or silence. It cared about facts, dates, and signatures that didn't align. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, the glow painting my hands in blue light. This was the point where preparation became strategy. In my training days, I drilled operatives to separate noise from signal, to keep evidence layered so no denial could stick. Patricia's paper war had relied on intimidation, but intimidation collapsed when exposed to structure. The hum of the server deepened as files synced. I opened a blank report, began structuring the submission. Section 1. Violation of open meeting law. Section 2. Falsification of minutes. Section 3. Contract irregularities with unauthorized backdating. Section 4. Misuse of security patrol authority. Each entry tied back to a citation, a log, or a record. Elena moved closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You're building it like a case file." "It is a case file," I said, "and when the county planning office reads it, they won't see a dispute between neighbors. They'll see process violations that demand intervention." I could feel her hand tighten slightly, then let go. She circled behind me, looking over the screen. "What happens to Mark?" "He's the linchpin," I said. "If he testifies, it strengthens everything. If he doesn't, the documents still hold weight, but less punch. They'll see a pattern, but testimony makes it personal." She nodded, then leaned against the wall, arms crossed again. "He looked terrified." "He was," I said. "But he chose. That matters." The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for more. I typed faster, structuring the narrative in a way oversight officers would follow. I highlighted every instance where Patricia's authority had overreached, emphasizing how her actions weren't just petty, they were illegal. The evidence would tell the story she tried to bury. The office was quiet except for keystrokes and the low server fan. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening, porch lights flicking on, children called inside. But inside my walls, a counteroffensive formed, deliberate and precise. I paused, leaning back. The evidence folder glowed, a clean digital wall against Patricia's paper threats. She thought her clipboard was enough. She never expected someone with training in evidence, process, and timing. Elena's voice broke the silence. "When you hit send, it changes everything." "Not immediately," I said, "but it sets the clock. County offices move slow, but once inspectors are on calendar, they can't be ignored. Patricia doesn't. Know it yet, but the ground under her feet is already shifting." I saved the draft report and encrypted it, setting a reminder to finalize by morning. The timing mattered. Send too early, and she'd scramble. Send too late, and the bench might already be gone. But now I had leverage. I stood stretching, the glow of the monitor still bright behind me. Elena stepped forward, brushing her hand along my arm. "Feels like the first breath we've had in weeks," she whispered. "It is," I said. Through the office window, I saw the easement marker glint faintly in the moonlight. The bench wasn't just wood anymore. It was proof of overreach, evidence tied to law. And now, with Mark's confession stitched into the file, the pressure wasn't on me. It was on Patricia. Tomorrow, the case would leave my desk. Tonight, I had built the spine of a submission strong enough to carry every witness, every neighbor, every silence that had weighed down Fox Hollow Estates. The clock had started ticking, and Patricia didn't even hear it yet. The next evening, the community center hummed with faint fluorescent buzz and the shuffle of folding chairs. The multi-purpose room smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee burned onto the bottom of a percolator. I had reserved it under the pretense of a neighborhood discussion on community preservation. Patricia hadn't bothered to attend. She assumed fear would keep people in their homes. But fear had a limit, and tonight, it bent. One by one, neighbors trickled in. Some moved cautiously, as if just stepping inside could earn them another violation notice. A few kept their heads low, arms folded tight, but they came anyway. The room filled with the quiet sound of murmurs, the kind of low tide that suggested hesitation, not loyalty to her. I stood at the front with a laptop balanced on the plastic podium. Elena handed out copies of the flyer I'd printed. Simple bullet points. Trail access. Easement rights. Pattern of enforcement. Each phrase anchored in truth, each designed to remind them they weren't alone. Mark slipped in late, eyes shadowed, his movements tight like he expected Patricia herself to burst through the door. He carried a folder under one arm, but the way his fingers gripped it gave him away. Fear wasn't gone, but conviction stood beside it now. I connected the laptop to the projector, light casting across the screen in sharp blocks of text. "This isn't about one family," I began, voice steady but quiet enough that everyone leaned closer. "It's about a system that's turned your porches, fences, and shutters into weapons against you." Slides clicked forward, copies of violation notices, dates stacked against each other, escalation patterns circled in red. Heads tilted, whispers rose. Someone in the back muttered about their own fine for leaving a trash can out 15 minutes past pickup. Another whispered about a letter citing their child's swing set. The murmurs grew louder as they recognized the pattern in themselves. Mark stepped forward, shoulders stiff, face pale. "The minutes she filed last month weren't real," he said suddenly. The room hushed. His voice wavered, but his hand set the folder down on the podium with a slap. "There wasn't a vote. She told me to record it as unanimous approval. I still have the draft before she changed it." Gasps rippled across the chairs. A man in the back leaned forward, shaking his head in disbelief. A woman whispered, "I knew it," under her breath. Mark's throat worked. "I signed things I shouldn't have signed. I stayed quiet too long, but I won't anymore." He slid a paper from the folder, the printed metadata log. "Here. This proves it." The paper trembled in his hand, but the words were clear. A timestamp mismatch circled in black ink. Proof that Patricia had rewritten records. The silence in the room wasn't fear now. It was focus. I clicked to the next slide, showing the county plat with the easement corridor highlighted. "This is recorded law," I said. "The trail is protected common use." Patricia had no authority to block it. No authority to tape off the bench. No authority to call law enforcement on a trespass that doesn't exist. And now, thanks to Mark, we know she falsified minutes and contracts to push her agenda. A man near the front raised his hand slightly. "If this is true, what happens?" "The county steps in," I said. "Inspectors verify, records confirm, and she's forced to rescind. This isn't about fighting with her clipboard. It's about making her answer to people who actually hold jurisdiction." The whispers turned into low conversation, threads weaving back and forth. Frustration bled into possibility. People shifted in their chairs, less guarded now, more upright. Fear wasn't dissolving, but it was cracking. I passed around a clipboard. "If you've received violation notices like these, write them down. Dates, details, amounts. Don't exaggerate. Facts only." The more consistent the pattern, the stronger the case pens scratched paper. Some hands shook, but they wrote anyway. Row by row, names and dates filled the lines. A chain of small resistances linked into something heavier. Elena gathered the sheets, stacking them carefully. Her eyes caught mine, steady, resolved. I closed the laptop, letting the screen fade to black. "This isn't finished," I said, "but it's beginning. Tomorrow, these records go to county and state oversight. And when they arrive here, Patricia won't be able to fine or threaten her way out. She'll have to answer." The air in the room felt different when the chairs scraped back and neighbors filed out. Not triumphant yet, but no longer silent. For the first time, Fox Hollow Estates carried the weight of a community no longer fully under her shadow. Mark lingered last, shoulders straighter now. He looked at me and said, "She won't see it coming." I nodded once. "That's the point." By morning, the reports were finished, encrypted, and dispatched. County planning, state oversight, every office that mattered had the files in their queue. Now it was about timing, and timing had always been my weapon. I stood at the entrance gate of Fox Hollow Estates just after noon. Heat shimmered on the blacktop, and the security guard leaned in his booth, bored, tapping at his phone. The hum of cicadas pressed like static in the background. At my back, the weight of a full case file sat inside my messenger bag. Ahead, beyond the gate, lay the neat rows of manicured lawns Patricia used like trophies. The guard looked up as a pair of county vehicles pulled into the turn lane, their white paint gleaming, emblems stamped on the doors. Clipboards rested on dashboards, high-visibility vests folded across seats. Inspectors. The guard straightened, fumbling for the gate remote. You expecting them? He asked, nervous. I invited them, I said. The first car rolled through, tires crunching over gravel. The second followed, slowing just inside to park near the curb. Doors opened with heavy thunks, and 2 inspectors stepped out, adjusting caps against the sun. They glanced at clipboards, murmured between themselves, then looked at me. You Daniel Mercer? One asked. Yes, I said, handing over the packet. Everything's cross-referenced. Easement plats, falsified minutes, contract logs, neighbor statements. It's all there. They exchanged a look, scanning the first few pages quickly, eyes narrowing. You've been thorough. Thorough's the only way it sticks, I replied. Behind us, a black SUV rolled up fast, brake pads squealing as it stopped just short of the inspectors. Patricia climbed out, sunglasses perched high, clipboard clutched like a weapon. What's this circus? She demanded, voice cutting sharp across the street. The inspectors didn't flinch. One flipped to a page in the file. Site inspection, complaint filed with supporting documentation. Your association will be contacted formally, but given the material presented, we're authorized to begin review immediately. Patricia's mouth tightened. You can't just walk in here. This is private property. Incorrect, the inspector said, tapping the highlighted section of the plat. The Greenbelt and common easements fall under county jurisdiction. Your restrictions conflict with recorded law. That's why we're here. Her jaw clenched. She looked past them at me, her expression a mask of contempt. You think dragging outsiders in will scare me? I don't need you scared, I said evenly. I just need you accountable. The guard shifted in his booth, pretending to check his screen, but watching closely. A pair of neighbors had stopped on the sidewalk too, murmuring, eyes locked on the standoff. Fear was still present, but curiosity was cracking it open. The inspectors didn't waste time. They moved toward the trail entrance, clipboards in hand, measuring tape swinging at their belts. I followed, my shadow stretching long across the pavement. Patricia trailed behind, snapping photos on her phone, as if she could rewrite facts by documenting them. At the easement marker, one inspector crouched, brushing dirt off the metal stake, reading the engraved coordinates. He compared them to his map, nodded, then walked the line toward the bench. The second circled the caution tape remnants still tied to the sapling. They spoke in short phrases, technical, precise, unbothered by Patricia's clipped protests. This tape was not authorized, one concluded. This structure predates the HOA's current restrictions, the other added, snapping a photo of the bench. It qualifies as a legacy fixture tied to easement access. Removal would violate county preservation code. Patricia's face flushed. That bench isn't sanctioned. Sanctioned isn't required, the inspector said. He pointed to the plate copy. This land was never ceded to your association. The words hung heavy in the air. Neighbors had gathered in 2s and 3s along the path now, drawn by the voices. Some whispered, some just stared, their silence no longer entirely fearful. The inspectors documented everything, photos, coordinates, written notes. They signed off their forms in duplicate and tucked them into the folder I'd given. One turned to me. We'll submit a formal report within 72 hours. The association will be ordered to rescind enforcement actions tied to this easement. Any removal orders are suspended effective immediately. Patricia's clipboard sagged in her grip. She opened her mouth, then closed it, sunglasses hiding her eyes, but not the tension radiating off her shoulders. The inspector handed me a copy of the preliminary findings. The paper felt solid in my hand, heavier than the flimsy violation notices Patricia had littered across the neighborhood. This wasn't intimidation ink. This was authority. The crowd began to disperse, murmurs louder now, bolder. Patricia lingered, standing rigid near her SUV. I caught her stare across the distance. For the first time, her silence carried something I hadn't seen before. Not smugness, not contempt. It looked a lot like fear. By the end of that week, Patricia had no choice but to call a board meeting. The HOA clubhouse boardroom, usually half empty and perfumed with stale coffee, was packed tight. Folding chairs lined the back wall, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, their whispers buzzing like a hive. Fear still lingered, but curiosity and something sharper cut through it now. I sat near the front, evidence folder stacked neatly before me. Elena stood behind me, calm but unyielding, a steady presence. Mark hovered by the board's table, his hands twitching at his sides, but he didn't retreat. He was here to finish what he'd started. Patricia entered late, her heels clicking hard across the laminate floor, sunglasses perched even indoors. She set her clipboard down with a crack. "This meeting," she announced, "was called to address recent false accusations against this board and clarify enforcement actions. Order must be maintained in Fox Hollow." Murmurs rolled through the room. A man in the back laughed under his breath. Patricia's eyes snapped to me. "Mr. Mercer, you've stirred up disruption. County inspectors were misled by selective information. You owe this community an explanation." I leaned forward, voice level. "The county wasn't misled. They read plats that predate you. They saw easement law you can't override. And they logged falsified minutes you filed under your secretary's name." Mark flinched, then straightened, stepping forward. "I have those minutes," he said, louder than I'd ever heard him. He held up a folder. "My original draft. Metadata proves Patricia rewrote them to claim unanimous approval when no such vote happened." Gasps rippled. Patricia's smile froze like glass. "That's a lie?" "It's not," Mark said, placing the draft on the table. His hands shook, but his voice steadied. "I signed things I regret. I stayed silent too long, but I won't let you erase what really happened." An inspector's preliminary findings slid across the table next. Neighbors had printed copies from the notice I'd shared. The words, "Enforcement actions rescinded pending review," glared in black ink. Patricia snatched the page, her fingers whitening around it. "You don't understand governance. Without strict order, property values plummet. I've protected this community." "You've strangled it," a neighbor near the door said, rising to her feet. She held up her own violation notice, the date circled. "You find me for chalk drawings my kids left on the driveway. That's not protection." Others followed. A man lifted his notice about a flagpole. Another waved his letter about shutters. The stack of grievances grew until the board table looked more like a courtroom evidence pile. Elena's voice cut through the swell, low but firm. "This was never about rules. It was about control." Patricia slammed her palm against the table. "Enough! These complaints are irrelevant. This board stands united, not united," Mark said. He turned to the room, shoulders squared. "I resign as secretary effective immediately, and I support petitioning for a special election." The room erupted. Neighbors clapped, voices overlapping, momentum breaking past fear. Patricia's face blanched as the tide shifted. I rose, holding up a hand. The room hushed slowly. "This doesn't end with shouting. The inspector's findings are real. Formal orders will follow. Patricia can't override them, no matter how many fines she prints. What we can do is file for a recall vote under state HOA law. With signatures from the majority here tonight, this board changes." Permanently, someone passed a clipboard forward, then another. Pens scratched in rapid succession, neighbors leaning over one another to sign. The air felt electric, alive with release. Fear was gone. Anger and unity had taken its place. Patricia sat frozen, eyes darting across the room as signatures filled line after line. For the first time, she was outnumbered, outflanked not by one man, but by an entire community no longer under her spell. The meeting ended not with her gavel, but with neighbors clustering around the petitions, voices sharp with energy. As I stepped out into the humid night, Elena at my side, I heard one sentence repeated over and over. "She doesn't run us anymore." The boardroom lights flickered off behind us. For the first time, Fox Hollow Estates belonged to its residents again. The petitions moved fast. Within days, more than half the neighborhood had signed, their names filling pages that looked nothing like the fear-slick violation notices Patricia once wielded. The county's formal order arrived by certified mail the same morning. Enforcement rescinded, removal suspended, easement confirmed. The seal at the bottom carried more weight than all her clipboards combined. By the time the community gathered again, it wasn't in the clubhouse under Patricia's glare. It was in the greenbelt, under the open sky, around the bench she had tried to erase. Children darted between trees, neighbors clustered in loose circles, and the caution tape was gone. In its place, a wreath of wildflowers rested on the bench, laid by a neighbor whose father had also served. I stood at the edge, Elena beside me, the hum of cicadas swelling like applause. Mark approached, no folder in his hands this time, no hesitation in his stride. He looked 10 years younger, the tension gone from his shoulders. "You started something," he said quietly. "No," I corrected. "You did. You chose." His smile was small but real. "Feels lighter, doesn't it?" It did. The neighborhood wasn't healed overnight. Scars of silence didn't fade so fast. But it was awake. For the first time, people weren't whispering through curtains. They were speaking, signing, acting. The shadow of one clipboard had been broken by the weight of many voices. Patricia hadn't shown her face since the recall petition. Rumors said she'd lawyered up, but the truth didn't matter anymore. Authority was already pried from her grip, and the state oversight office had her actions under review. For someone who thrived on control, silence was the one punishment she couldn't twist into power. Elena's hand found mine. Her voice carried softly. "Your father would have been proud." I looked at the bench, the dent where his ring once struck. He'd have reminded me legacy isn't about wood. It's about whether people remember what it stood for and neighbors gathered closer. Some sat on the bench, others leaned against the trees. A few spoke quietly about what came next. New elections, rebuilding trust, rewriting rules to protect instead of punish. The air was no longer heavy. It felt like possibility. I took a breath, stepping forward so everyone could hear. This isn't about one family. It's about reminding ourselves that rules are meant to serve us, not cage us. That fear only holds power when we stay silent. You broke that silence. You chose to fight back. That's what will carry this place forward. Heads nodded. Someone clapped. Another joined, then more, until the sound rippled across the clearing. It wasn't for me. It was for themselves, for the courage they'd found. I sat on the bench, the wood warm beneath me. Elena rested her hand on the backrest, Mark standing to my right. Around us, the community lingered, voices rising like a tide. The bench wasn't just a seat anymore. It was a landmark, a reminder of what we'd defended and what we'd earned. The sky dimmed toward evening, fireflies beginning to spark in the trees. Children laughed, chasing them. For once, the sound wasn't overshadowed by dread of who might be watching. The neighborhood finally sounded like a neighborhood again. I glanced at the easement marker, the small rod of metal glinting faintly. It had stood silent all along, waiting for someone to read its truth. That was the lesson. The law had always been there. We just needed the courage to call it forward. Elena squeezed my hand. "Feels like the first real day here," she whispered. "It is," I said. I looked at the neighbors, at the bench, at the ground my father promised me would always matter. Then I looked into the camera I'd set on the tripod near the edge of the clearing, blinking red. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. The fireflies drifted higher, the cicadas softened, and the bench held steady. Legacy remained, and now the community was finally free to sit with it.